frozen stranger in his arms, a blizzard stealing her last breaths, and a cowboy who refused to let death win the woman he'd loved, since the moment her green eyes fluttered open in that wrecked stagecoach.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories. Turn on the bell icon so you can do not miss any new video.
The wind howled across the Montana territory like a wounded animal, driving snow sideways through the darkness. Jake Thornton pulled his coat tighter around the small figure in his arms, feeling her shallow breath against his neck. Each step through the knee-deep drifts sent pain shooting through his exhausted legs, but stopping meant death for both of them. "Stay with me, darling," he whispered against her frozen hair. "Please, God, let her live." Clara had been a stranger 12 hours ago. Now she was everything. The morning had started simply enough. Jake had ridden into Pine Creek to purchase supplies for his small ranch when he noticed the stagecoach, overturned at the bottom of Miller's Ridge. The driver lay dead beneath the wheels, frozen solid, and 2 passengers had already succumbed to the cold. But inside the wreckage, wrapped in a thin shawl completely inadequate for the brutal winter, he found her. She had the most beautiful face he had ever seen, even pale and blue from the cold. Dark hair spilled across her shoulders, and when her eyes fluttered open, they were the color of spring leaves, a green so vivid it made his heart stumble. "Am I dead?" she had asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Not yet, ma'am," Jake had replied, already lifting her into his arms. "And I intend to keep it that way." He learned her name as he carried her toward his horse. Clara Bennett, a schoolteacher traveling from Boston to take a position in the small town of Redemption, still 2 days' ride away. She had left behind everything familiar, a comfortable home, a family who disapproved of her independence, and a suitor who wanted to cage her spirit in a loveless marriage. "I wanted to mean something," she had told him, her teeth chattering as he wrapped her in his bedroll and set her on his horse. "I wanted my life to matter." "It matters," Jake had said firmly, mounting behind her and pulling her against his chest. "It matters to me." Those words had surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. Jake Thornton had spent 5 years alone on his ranch, recovering from the war that had taken so much from him. He had watched friends die, had buried his own brother in Virginia soil, and had returned to Montana hollow and empty. He had convinced himself he would never feel anything again. But something about this woman, this fierce, determined woman, who had crossed an entire continent alone, who had survived a stagecoach accident that killed 3 others, something about her made him feel alive for the first time in years. They had been riding for several hours when the storm descended without warning. One moment the sky was merely gray and threatening, and the next, visibility dropped to nothing. Jake knew these mountains, knew that shelter lay somewhere ahead, an abandoned mining cabin he had used before during harsh weather. But the snow disoriented him, and soon even his experienced eyes could not find the landmarks he needed. When his horse stumbled and went down, throwing them both into a snowdrift, Jake knew their situation had become desperate. The animal's leg was injured, and though it pained him deeply, Jake knew the horse could not carry them further. He removed the saddle, took what supplies he could carry, and lifted Clara once again. That had been 3 hours ago. Now his arms burned with exhaustion, his legs moved by sheer will alone, and Clara's breathing had grown dangerously shallow. "Talk to me," he begged her. "Tell me about Boston. Tell me about the school where you'll teach." "Cold," she murmured. "So cold." "I know, darling. I know. But you have to stay awake. Tell me about your students. What will you teach them?" A ghost of a smile crossed her blue lips. "Reading. I love books, stories about brave knights and beautiful ladies. Happy endings." "You'll get your happy ending," Jake promised, though he was no longer certain he believed it. "I swear to you, Clara Bennett, you will have the happiest ending of any story ever told." He stumbled, nearly fell, but caught himself against a tree trunk. The bark was rough against his numb hands, and for a moment he wanted nothing more than to sink down into the snow and rest. Just for a moment. just long enough to gather his strength. But he knew that moment would be their last. The cold was seductive that way, promising rest that became eternal sleep. "My father wanted me to marry Mr. Hartwell," Clara said suddenly, her words slurred but present. "He owns 3 factories, very wealthy, very boring." Jake laughed despite himself, the sound harsh in the frozen air. "Boring, you say? Like watching paint dry on a fence post." He talked about nothing but profit margins and worker efficiency. She stirred slightly in his arms, her hand moving to rest against his chest. "He never once asked what I dreamed about." "What do you dream about?" Jake asked, partly to keep her talking, partly because he genuinely wanted to know. "A little house with a garden, students who love learning as much as I do. Someone who looks at me the way the knights look at their ladies in the stories." Her voice grew quieter. "Someone who would carry me through a blizzard." "Clara." Jake stopped walking, looked down at her face. "I need you to know something, in case we don't make it." "We'll make it," she said, but her voice held no conviction. "In case we don't," he repeated. "I need you to know that meeting you today was the best thing that has happened to me in 5 years. I stopped living after the war. I was just existing, going through the motions, waiting to die. But you made me remember what it feels like to care about something, to care about someone." Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, freezing almost instantly on her cheeks. "Jake, I know it sounds crazy, we just met, but I believe God put me on that road today specifically to find you, and I am not going to let you die. Do you understand me? I refuse to let you die." With renewed determination, he pushed forward through the snow. His lungs burned with each breath, the cold air like knives in his chest. His vision blurred with exhaustion and the relentless assault of snowflakes. But he kept moving, one step after another, because the woman in his arms needed him to. And then, like a gift from heaven, he saw it, the outline of a structure against the white chaos of the storm. The mining cabin. Jake nearly wept with relief. He staggered the final 100 yards, kicked open the door, and carried Clara inside. The cabin was crude but solid, with a small fireplace and a stack of dry wood left by some previous traveler. His hands shook so badly he could barely strike the match, but finally a flame caught, and he coaxed it into a fire that drove back the deathly chill. He found blankets in a chest, wrapped Clara in them and held her close to the growing warmth. For hours he watched over her, feeding the fire, rubbing her hands and feet to restore circulation, talking to her constantly even when she seemed beyond hearing. "You're going to be fine," he told her again and again. "You're going to teach those children. You're going to have your garden and your books, and someone who asks about your dreams every single day." Just before dawn, the storm began to ease, and Clara opened her eyes. "Jake?" Her voice was stronger now, her cheeks showing the faintest hint of color. "I'm here," he said, his own voice breaking with emotion. "I'm right here. You saved my life. You saved mine," he replied. "I was dead inside before I found you." She reached up, touched his face with fingers that were finally warm. "That's quite a story. A cowboy and a schoolteacher meeting in a blizzard. It needs an ending," Jake said. "A happy one like you wanted." "How would you end it?" she asked. He took her hand, pressed it to his lips, then held it against his heart. The cowboy realizes he's fallen in love with the schoolteacher. He asks her to stay, not in redemption, but on his ranch. He promises to build her a schoolhouse of her own, to bring students from all the nearby homesteads. He promises to plant her a garden and fill their home with books. He promises to ask about her dreams every single day for the rest of their lives. Tears streamed down Clara's face, but she was smiling. And what does the schoolteacher say? That's up to her, but the cowboy hopes with all his heart that she says, yes. Clara sat up slowly, her body still weak, but her spirit blazing in those remarkable green eyes. The schoolteacher says she must be dreaming. Things like this don't happen outside of storybooks. Maybe they do, Jake said. Maybe sometimes God writes better stories than any author could imagine. She looked at him for a long moment. This stranger who had carried her through impossible conditions, who had refused to let her die, who had opened his wounded heart to her when neither of them had any guarantee of tomorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "The schoolteacher says yes." Jake gathered her into his arms, holding her gently, reverently. "I love you, Clara Bennett. I know it makes no sense. I know we only just met, but I love you." "I love you too," she replied. "The moment you lifted me from that stagecoach, the moment you said my life mattered to you, I knew you were the knight from all my stories." They were married in Pine Creek 3 weeks later, as soon as Clara had fully recovered her strength. The whole town attended, curious about the stranger who had captured the heart of their most solitary rancher. They watched Jake Thornton smile for the first time anyone could remember, watched him look at his bride like she was the most precious treasure in all the territory. And she was. Spring came early that year, melting away the brutal winter that had nearly claimed them both. Jake built the schoolhouse he had promised, a beautiful structure with large windows to let in the light and shelves for all the books Clara loved. Children came from ranches and homesteads for miles around, drawn by word of the schoolteacher, with the gentle voice and the endless patience. In the evenings, Jake and Clara would sit on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. He would ask about her dreams, and she would tell him, and together they would plan their future. The garden flourished under Clara's care, filling their table with fresh vegetables and filling their home with flowers. When their first child was born, a daughter with her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination, they named her Hope, because that was what they had given each other on that frozen night in the mountains. Hope that love could find you when you least expected it. Hope that tomorrow could be better than today. Hope that even the coldest winter eventually gives way to spring. Years later, when Clara told the story of how she and Jake had met, she always ended it the same way. "He carried me through the snow," she would say, her eyes finding her husband's across whatever room they were in. "He prayed I would live, and I did live, more fully and more happily than I ever imagined possible, because sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we nooks. Sometimes they're the ones we live." And Jake, still looking at her with all the love of that first desperate night, would nod and say, "The cowboy got his happy ending after all."